they witness so much, but they're thinking about it, they understand it, they're synthesizing it, and they have thoughts and ideas. And I'm like, and a lot of them are pretty on point.
Hello, everybody. This is Sex Positivity Unfiltered, where we talk about sex and we are not polite about it. My name is Lyndsey Murray.
And I'm Denise Stratton.
And today we have a very special guest that we are so excited to talk with them and have them on our show. Please welcome Dr. Nadine Thornhill, EDD. Dr. Thornhill is a sexuality educator, actually an award-winning sexuality educator, speaker, and content creator based in Toronto, Ontario. With over 15 years of experience, Nadine has helped thousands of adults and youth learn and communicate openly about consent, pleasure, relationships, and sexuality. Nadine created #SaveSexEd, a YouTube series covering sex education module in Ontario's 2015 health and physical education curriculum. Nadine has been featured in numerous media outlets, including Oprah Magazine, The Washington Post, The Big Sex Talk on CBC, and the award-winning documentary Sex with Sue. She supports aspiring sex educators and is here today to share her expertise with all of you. So, Nadine, we're so excited to have you here.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I think really just kind of how we can kick this off. And Denise, maybe I'll turn it over to you to help kick us off. And we're just going to dive into some questions about you, your experience as a sex educator, but also some specific questions on how to talk to youth about sex and what you would recommend and what your experience has been like.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
I definitely want to start off with, I mean, on your website, you pretty much say that I fell into this career, which I really enjoyed. So if you want to kind of just go into how you even became a sex educator, because that's a career that most people don't have.
Okay. So actually my first unofficial foray into sex education was in the 12th grade. Yeah, in the 12th grade. So I was in French immersion, and so we had like a lot of my classes were in French, and one of them was media studies. So for my grade 12 media studies project, I did a compilation of portrayals of safer sex in media, and basically my whole thesis, if you can call it that, when you're in 12th grade. You probably can't, but I guess, yeah, the theme, I would say, of my project was how we didn't see a lot of portrayals of safer sex in mainstream media at that time, in film and TV, even though there was a lot of sex. And that would have been in the early to mid 90s, at a time when there was a lot of public discourse around the AIDS epidemic, and a lot of the sort of public health messaging targeted towards people my age was very much like, have safe sex, you're going to die. It's like, well, this is really interesting, because on the one hand, these are the messages that we're getting through school, in phys ed, in public service announcements. But over here in mainstream media, which is the thing that we're all looking at, nobody cares. There's not a condom in sight. So that was my first unofficial foray into sex ed. And then I did nothing with it for years and years and years. And I went into theater as my career, and I was doing that and having the time of my life, and thought I would do that forever. And then, as folks in theater often have to do, I had various day jobs between gigs. And so where I was living, there was a sex positive store, and I used to shop there. And I was looking for a new day job, and someone mentioned to me that they were hiring. So I went in and applied, and I got the job, and I was working in the storefront, but they also used to do workshops in the evenings. And so the manager asked me if I would be interested in facilitating workshops, and that's how I got started, was facilitating workshops. And I really loved it, and I was good at it, and everything kind of happened from there. So it was not my plan at all. I did not even know that was a thing you could do as a career. So that's how I got my start.
Well, yeah, that's an incredible story. I mean, it's such a unique story, but a very fascinating one. I'm curious, like the workshops you did, what would be an example of a workshop that you would have done at that job?
Okay, so I think I remember most of them. So I believe the very first one that I did was Fellatio 101. And
Oh,
then there
very
was
cool.
Cunnilingus 101. So those were the first two that I did, and those were sort of our most popular. They were like pretty, they were pretty accessible and, had pretty broad appeal in the community. And then I moved on to doing sex toys. One that I did a lot that was kind of like my specialty was G-Spot 101. And then we actually developed one. It was me and one of the other folks who worked in the store with me. We developed one that was about sensual and erotic movement, which was hilarious because anyone who knows me, and especially at that time, I'm like, my awareness of my body was not great. It was very clumsy.
Mm.
So I was like, yeah, sure, erotic movement. Like if falling is erotic, maybe it can be. Yeah, so those are some of the ones that I remember, and I definitely remember like G-Spot 101 was one of my favorites.
Oh my God, we need you to come to Texas.
Girl. Yes, yes. So while you were doing these workshops, you're engaging in the community a lot. Were there a lot of like, did you notice any common misconceptions that I guess your clients would have as?
Yeah, and it was interesting. Like that time in my career was also very formative for me because I was learning a lot as I was facilitating.
Mhm.
And so something that I clocked fairly early on was that oftentimes people would come in sort of hoping to get very sort of concrete tips, like particularly around something like G-spot, cunnilingus, fellatio. Like they came in assuming that, well, there is a correct way to do this, or like there is a way to stimulate a penis, or there is a way to stimulate a clitoris, or whatever, that every person with that body part will respond to positively. And to be honest, I probably had that misconception as well, not long before I started teaching these things. And the other thing that I noticed, and that's not how we taught it. We definitely talked about like, here are some techniques and things you can try, but the foundation of the workshop was a lot more about here's how you can communicate, and here are things to pay attention to. If you're having oral sex with a partner, or if you're doing G-spot stimulation, and like here are how different people with G-spots are different, and here's how G-spots respond differently, like, and and talking about how it's different not only with different people, but it can be different with the same person depending on their age, where they are in their lives. If there's somebody who has a menstrual cycle, where they are in their menstrual cycle, like, and so it was very much like pay attention, communicate with your partner, like express yourself, and sort of figure it out. That was often a revelation for people, but I also noticed how by taking that approach, people tended to relax. Like,
Yes.
there was often an energy at the beginning, or at least my perception was that there was an energy at the beginning of a workshop where people were, if not out and out tense, but they were kind of like, just give me the answer. Like I want to do it right. And that over the workshops were usually, I think they were either like 90 minutes to 2 hours. And sort of over the course of that first hour, like I would feel this like sort of just almost like palpable sigh as people settled in and were like, oh, okay. So it's not about doing it right. That's not a thing. It's just about figuring out what's going to work for me. And if I'm doing this with a partner, what's going to work with a partner. And that there is no right or wrong about this. And people tended to really, really relax. And that right off the bat, I think that's one of the things that really drew me in, was this idea of like, oh, okay, this really isn't about like there's a normal in terms of sexuality, in terms of sexual behavior or sexual activity. That's not what it is. It's not, oh, am I normal? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it the right number of times? Am I like responding properly when someone does this to my body? And when I do a thing to somebody else's body, is that like the thing I should be doing? It's just like, how do you feel? What do you want? What does, if you're with a person, what do they want? And how do you negotiate all of that so that you can have an experience that you want to be having? You know, the normal of it is just not a thing. It's not like, it's not only is it not relevant, it just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. That was like a big thing that I noticed with other people, but I realized like it shifted something in me as well.
I relate hard.
Yeah.
I relate hard to the people who actually sought those workshops out, because when I was young queer lady, I started having sex around 16. So between like my 16 and 21-year-old self, I wanted that roadmap. I wanted a roadmap that basically showed me, hey, this is how you pleasure a woman. This is exactly how you get to the G-spot. This is how you make your orgasm. Like, I wanted that, you know, step-by-step guideline. And it wasn't until, you know, having my first partner I was with for 6 years. So it was really just learning her. But I getting to the point of realizing that it's not really about, you know, this roadmap, this one thing that's going to work for everybody. It's about learning who that person is. And it wasn't until I started having different sexual experiences with different people that I gained that knowledge. So the fact that you guys taught that just off the bat is huge.
Yeah. And like I said, because I was also very early in my own learning, that was also huge for me. To just approach it from like it's not an equation, you know, and it's not choreography that you learn and then you perform it. It's an experience that you have and you navigate as you're having it.
Yeah, I think that's great. And even what you said about, like, it could be different with the same person depending on the context, like where they are in life, where they're at in the day. I mean, how are they feeling in that moment? And that's going to change how they respond to it. And I think, you know, I think I see this a lot with my clients too. Like, people want the answer because they think that will remove the anxiety, but it actually ends up increasing the anxiety. And then, because now it's like a pass fail test. Am I doing it right? If I'm not doing it right, I must be doing it wrong. And then it's just this ball of anxiety, and there's really not a lot of room for pleasure in that if you're so worried about getting it wrong. And so, what a beautiful message for people to know that it's nuanced, isn't it?
It is. It really is. Yeah. And so that was, and because I got to see how that was transformative for the folks in our workshops, but I could also feel how learning these things was transformative for me. I got hooked on it. I was like, ooh, this is a hit of dopamine that I am enjoying, and I want to keep doing this. And so
Awesome. Is that going, I'm skipping ahead here just a little bit, but I know that you have a web series called Everybody Counts. Is
Everybody Curious?
Everybody Curious. Okay, I knew it was like a C word, I can recall. I would imagine there's some of that in that web series too, of teaching people kind of the nuance of really what sex can look like, or what, I don't know, how their body responds. And
so Everybody Curious, we just released our 4th season. So yeah, it's a web series. I collaborate with a really amazing team. So we have our executive producer, Louise Pollard, and the series was actually her brainchild. And then we have an amazing director, Kim Harris, and then I am one of the hosts, and I'm I guess you could say, like, I'm the lead sort of sexuality education consultant as well. And then I have my co-host Spencer West, who is a YouTube personality and a queer disabled activist. And so he, brings in both the sort of like queer perspective, but also a lot of our cast members, particularly in season 3 and in this season, are disabled in some way. And so he brings in sort of that lens and that perspective as well. But that is sort of again, a core principle of our show, again, that it's not about sort of saying to kids, hey, this is right, this is wrong. It's about giving them a space where they can both ask questions about the things that they're curious about around things like bodies, like relationships, and more, but also giving them an opportunity to talk about their own lives, their own perspectives. I was talking to somebody the other day about the show, and they were asking me, what is the thing that's come up that's maybe shocked me the most when I'm working with the kids? And I said, it's not any particular subject. What always kind of blows me away is how much these kids know, and that when you give them, the opportunity to talk about a lot of these issues, I'm like, they witness so much, but they're thinking about it, they understand it, they're synthesizing it, and they have thoughts and ideas. And I'm like, and a lot of them are pretty on point. Yeah, that's also pretty mind-blowing for me to see. And I know we live in a time when younger people have so much access to information. So maybe it's not surprising that, I'm speaking with children who are 10 and 11 and 12, and they are able to talk about things like queerness. They're able to talk about things like consent, or what constitutes a healthy relationship, in ways, and with a level of sophistication. And like, I know I did not have that. I was nowhere close to that when I was there.
Same. I was not either. 10, 11, 12. You couldn't have gotten that out of me,
No, absolutely. Like, I don't even think it was in there. Or if it was, I definitely did not have a vocabulary to articulate things the way a lot of our youth are able to. It's amazing.
To add a little bit of a different experience, I had my peers at 12, around 12, around 12 and 13, when I knew people who were having sex and engaging in sex. So that did come a little quick for me, as far as like the knowledge of the people I know doing things like that. So I'm curious, because how do you facilitate these young people, these kids, being able to talk openly about it? Because I'm just putting myself in my young person shoes, where I was very curious, and it was much more comfortable being able to do I don't even know if Google was around back then, but being able to do an internet search, right? And trying to find my knowledge and my skills that way. Like, that's kind of how I started, is I just, other than watching porn, because porn was accessible to me kind of when I was younger, but I actually looked up articles on how to engage in sex and how to do it properly as well. So, but that was much more comfortable than talking to an adult, just putting myself in my shy perspective. There would be no way in hell at 12 or 13 that I would want to talk to an adult.
I can tell you how we do it on the show, and then I can tell you how I do it, say, if I'm going into a classroom, because it's different things. So how we do it on the show, because they're going to be talking on camera, and because ideally we need them to actually vocalize what they're thinking, and also there's just a lot going on. What you see in the series is like a tiny portion of what's actually happening in real life. So in real life, we meet with all of our young cast well before we film, so they have a chance to meet me, they have a chance to meet Spencer. Ideally, we meet with them a couple of times and just spend time getting to know them. Asking them about, what they're interested in, what's fun for them, what's their day-to-day, like anything they want to talk to us about, just so they start to get comfortable with us as people, and we get to know them as well. And then on the days that we're filming with them, we make sure that they have plenty of time to, if we're going into their home, then we get there and give them plenty of time to settle in and get used to like cameras and crew and whatnot being around, like all around. And if they're coming to us, like if they're coming into studio, it's the same thing. We have them come in and we give them, you know, usually good like 2 hours at least to settle in, get used to the place, orient themselves, get comfortable. Spencer and I will spend time with them before the cameras are up. And we let them know, you know, you're allowed to say anything that you want. You know, if you say something and you think about it and you want to go again, just let us know. It's okay. We're all just having a conversation, you know, and we'll also sort of just brief them on sort of, this is more or less in this scene what we would like to talk about. I'll be like, you know, I'm going to ask you a few questions and the cameras are going to be rolling. And then, you know, the director's going to say this, or you might see like a camera person like move from here to here, you know, again, just bringing them in on it and letting them know what's going to happen. Ask them, you know, if they have any concerns, if there's anything that they need or they're thinking about, if they have any questions. We also let them know that if anything comes up while the cameras are up and anything like something doesn't feel okay or they need something, just to let us know. You know, and it'll be cameras down, we'll address it. So we try to make them as comfortable as possible. And then in the filming, Spencer and I are mostly asking them questions, and they're open-ended questions for them to share opinions or ideas. So it might be a question, you know, say if we were doing an episode of about consent, I might ask, who here has heard the word consent? Put up your hand. So that the first question or the first couple of questions aren't even, you need to speak. It's just an action, quiet. And then I might ask something like, does anybody here have an idea of what consent means? And then again, you'll have kids who are inherently a little chattier and like raring to go. And it's usually, you know, them, they'll get it going. And then the other kids will then often start to pipe up with opinions and thoughts as we go through. And then we talk a little bit, and then we have a game or some kind of activity. So it's not just sitting and talking. And in the activity, that again often draws people out. And, you know, we let people know you don't have to say anything. If you're not feeling a certain question or you don't have an opinion, you don't ever have to say anything you don't want to do. And the other thing that we do is we make sure that when we're asking questions, we're never asking questions that prompt the kids to reveal specific personal information about themselves or their own. We let them know that if they want to, they can. And I ask them that if they are going to say something about themselves, that it only be about themselves, to not talk about people who aren't in the room. And then our crew is very, very sensitive because occasionally on camera, I will flag that a kid has said something that I'm like, that's great. And I won't tell them that, like I won't tell the kid that, but I'll be like, they said something that would sort of identify them to a broader audience. And so we'll just make a note of that. You know, the crew and Spencer and I will be like, it's fine, let them talk, let them do their thing, but we're not going to use that in the edit, or we're not going to use that particular in the edit, because we also want to, as much as possible, guard and protect the kids. So they're on camera, but for example, like we never say their full names or anything like that. They don't appear in like credits, simply because, yeah, we want to protect them. And that's similar to what I would do in a classroom. Oftentimes I don't have the opportunity to come in, you know, and spend time with a class a couple of times before I come in for the lesson, but we try to make some sort of class guidelines for whatever's happening. And so I sort of say, sort of, this is how I approach the work. You know, I may ask you questions, but you're free to answer and say whatever you want. You don't have to if you don't want to. I let them know, like, you can ask me any questions you want. I was like, I answer almost all questions. Sometimes I may not answer a question if it's really personal, especially if it's sharing things about someone who's not here. But other than that, ask me whatever you want. I accept every question as though it is earnest and sincere. regardless of whether or not I'm like, oh, this one may just be to like throw me off or whatever. I'm like, I never know. And somebody else in the class may want to know. And yeah, you know, it's starting off gentle, then getting into, and then sort of, you know, as they're getting comfortable. And at this point in my career, I can gauge. And so sometimes I'll have a group of kids where I'm like, okay, no, they're like maybe a little more shy, or this is newer for them. So, you know, I will sort of match the questions or the topics I'm bringing up to the group. And then sometimes I'll have a group who's very, very engaged, or they just happen to be, you know, very knowledgeable, or they have a lot to say. And I'm like, okay, I can go a little deeper with this group and we'll do an activity. The other thing I will bring into a live class is a question box. And so it is literally a box, and I have cue cards and I have a bunch of pens. And all of the cue cards are the same color, all the pens are the same color. And then if it happens to be a class, I'll usually check with the teacher beforehand, and I'll ask, you know, is there anybody in the classroom who isn't able to write? And if that is the case, then I will I'll work with the teacher to come up with an accommodation so that that student can still anonymously give me their question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll hand out the cue cards and the pens typically, and I will say, either write down a question you have about whatever the topic is. So with younger kids, it's often a specific topic. Like if I'm like, we're going to talk about bodies, and it's like a really, you know, like rudimentary lesson about bodies. So I'll be like, write down a question you have about bodies. You know, if it's a high school, it might be like, write down any question you have about sex or sexuality. And I say, if you don't have a question to ask me, then write down a recommendation you have for a movie or a TV show you think I should watch, or a song or an album you think I should download, because I want everybody to fill it out, because I don't want the kids who have questions to be like, but now everybody can see I'm writing.
Yeah, like the only one, or okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
And that's the reason I use all the same color cue cards and all the same color pens, because I'm like, I don't want anyone to be like, okay, well, I saw you had like a purple marker, and I can sort of see as she's opening the card that this is the purple marker question, and now I know it's you. Like, youth are sleuthy, like they will figure it out. So I'm just like, yeah, and that's why I say, like, even if you don't have a question, write me something, and then put everything in, and I'm like, don't write your name, don't write any, like, just the question, fold it up, I collect them, and then we spend some time and I just answer all of the questions, and I also read out all of the recommendations I get, and I've gotten some fire recommendations for like series that I have.
Oh, nice.
Right. So I love, that's my favorite thing, because I'm like, even if I don't get any questions, I get all of these great recommendations for like music and TV shows and movies.
Wow, I absolutely love how detailed and meticulous you have thought out this safe space to basically keep everybody anonymous and give that ability to really share. Like that seems revolutionary. Just having that space. I really wish I would have had something like that when I was younger. So you obviously have a lot of knowledge on how to create this like non-judgmental, very supportive kind of area for, you know, kids to talk to. How would you translate that to like parents? Like, what is your helpful advice to parents to be able to create a space like that? Because you obviously can, but I'm sure parents also wish they could create something like that with their kid at home.
And I also have like a side question to that. That was kind of what was on my mind, right, about parents. But I also am curious your opinion on at what age parents should start talking to their kids about sex. So that's a question that I think a lot of parents don't know. Like, when do I even start that?
Okay, so I'll answer that question first, and then I'll go into the how. So I always say the best time to start talking to your kids about sex is right now. Right now, regardless of what age they are, right now. And it is going to look different at different ages. And so the conversation that we might be having with our kids when they are 16 and the conversation that we are having when they are 2, different conversations. I have an ebook, and it's called talking to kids about sexuality. And it's detailed, but all of this, of course, is general because every specific kid is different in terms of their development. But I break it down into conversations for preschoolers, kids, tweens, teens. And so each segment of the book is both, just sort of general advice and information about this is where most youth who are like kind of in this stage of development basically are, in terms of their ability to comprehend things, what might be relevant to them in terms of sexuality. For example, with preschoolers, it's they're just curious about their own bodies, so it's helping them name body parts, including genitals. It could be things like giving them like very rudimentary introductions to different types of relationships. And I'm like, and something I emphasize, and I'm like, listen, this is a thing we already do. Like, if you've ever read your kid a storybook and there's a family, like usually it's a straight family.
Yeah.
That is sexual orientation. So you can just expand that and do that with, different types of families. Things like gender. I'm like, things are very, very gendered. And in fact, things for children tend to be hyper gendered in a way that
totally
aren't necessarily for like teens and adults. So I'm like, again, it is a thing that you can do in a child-friendly way because we already do it. Like, I'm like, we literally do it when babies are born in the hospital. Like, you put a cap on them to match their genitals to signal to the world that this is the gender that they've been assigned. I'm like, you're not going to say it in those words to a 3-year-old, but we can talk about these things. We can talk about like, what kind of clothes do we want to wear? What kind of like haircut do we think is neat? What are the names that we like all of those different things. We can talk about that in those ways with kids. We can help them name and identify their emotions. They're having those things. All of that are like building blocks for lessons about healthy communication, about navigating, even consent. And like, if you teach your kids that when we go visit the neighbors, we don't just walk into their house because we want to. We ring the doorbell, we knock on the door, we wait to be invited in. And then once we're in, we go to the parts of the house that we have been invited to go to.
Yeah.
That's consent. You're teaching them consent. It's the same principle. You're not applying it to a sexual relationship, but I'm like, all of that is foundational. Those are the conversations you can have if you have preschoolers, and then you get to build on that through their teen years and beyond. However, what I will say is, I'm like, okay, people are like, but I didn't do that with my preschoolers. I'm like, that's fine. Do it now.
Yeah.
Do it now. Your kids still exist. You still have a relationship with them. So just do it now. Is my very long-winded answer to your question. And then as for how to sort of create these environments in your own home, what I will acknowledge as someone who is also a parent is that, at least in my experience, doing it at home and doing it in the classroom were very different things for me. Because I had a much stronger emotional investment in my own child. My experience, I always refer to myself as a parent because I feel like mother has very specific social connotations, and I'm like, I don't necessarily fulfill all of those, but also I'm like, I am somebody who is perceived as a mother, and I'm like, I can say as a mother, I'm like, there are also a lot of there can be anyway, a lot of really intense social pressures to do it right. Again, it's that thing of do it right.
Yes.
And I will say that for me, that drastically affected the way I was at home versus the way I was when I was working, because the stakes felt so much higher. So it took me a long time to learn this and apply this in my personal life. So the first thing I will say to any parents out there who are listening is, be gentle with yourself. Be gentle with yourself when you are doing this. You do not have to do this perfectly. Again, there's no such thing. The second thing I will say, and this is like a rough one, But it's something I've been thinking about a lot, especially in my parenting, but also as an educator, is that I think there is this idea that a lot of people have that, again, if you parent correctly and if you teach your children correctly, they will turn out a certain way and they will behave a certain way, and that the way your children behave or the things your children believe are a direct result of what you did or didn't do. And I'm not going to say like, oh, what you do has nothing to do with how your kids are. Of course it does. But your kids are separate people. Our kids are separate
Yes.
people from us. And so the other thing that I would say, and I would give myself this advice if I could talk to my past self, is that you can do the teaching. You can give them the information. You can't control what they do with the information once they have it, because you're not them. And so those would be sort of my first two things. Be gentle with yourself, and as much as you can, if you can let go of the idea that I can make my kid be a certain person if I take a certain approach. And like, I don't know that you can't. Your
That's
kid
a
is
really good point, because I think I've seen parents, and not to knock any parents out there because maybe they're doing their best, but I've seen the intent. Well, I mean, I think even my parents, in a way, the intention of like talking about sex is the intention kind of is out of control. Like, I'm sharing this with you because you shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to tell you this with that purpose, instead of I'm just sharing it so you have the knowledge. And then you can use your own, you can use your own mind to determine like what that means for you and what you're going to do with that.
Exactly. And so where I think we've had success, my kid and my kid is 17 now, so almost an adult. But where I think we've had the most success in navigating these things is when I have been able to show up as someone who loves him deeply, which I'm sure anyone listening to this loves their child deeply. And from that, I can be curious about who he is, rather than feeling like it is my job to mold him, to just, who is this human being in front of me? And who are they becoming as a person? Who do they want to become as a person? And how does their sexuality factor into that? So when I can do that, I ask more questions. When I do that, when I hear the answers, I'm able to take it in sort of with less judgment. And the other place where I think I've been where we have more success with each other, and I say with each other because I think of it as something we're doing together, because it's part of our relationship. We have a relationship, right? He's not a person that I am creating. He's a person who exists, and I am his parent, and that's a relationship. When I can think of it as a relationship, my role is to support, and when he wants it, my role is to offer guidance. And finally, be like, as the adult, my responsibility is to deal with my feelings, because and I don't know a parent who hasn't had this experience where it's like, oh my gosh, but my kid is doing a thing or saying a thing, and me as an older person, I'm like, oh, I can maybe see potential like pitfalls or problems or challenges or and I'm like, he doesn't have to change who he is to make me feel calmer. I'm older. I'm the parent. So I'm not saying like I do not get in my feelings, because I am an inherently anxious person. I have ADHD. My imagination is bonkers. I will catastrophize anything and everything. So when I tell you that parenting has been one of the most fulfilling, but one of the most terrifying experiences, if not the most terrifying experience of my life, I'm not exaggerating. I have a lot of big feelings about it. And one of the things I have had to learn in navigating our conversations, discussions, communications around sexuality is, Nadine, you've got to deal with your own big feelings. You've got to learn how to deal with your own big feelings. Because I have feelings. And not all of my feelings are like hey, I'm a sex educator, like I can handle this, I'm good at my job. Like, it's also like sometimes getting triggered, or sometimes being brought back to my own childhood, or it's, you know, I've had a bad experience, I'm afraid he's going to have the same experience because that's all, that stuff all lives in me. It's all very raw. It's all like very vulnerable. And I just find it much, much more challenging to do in the home than I do professionally. But at the same time, I'm like, I feel like a bonus for me is I'm like, I feel like I've grown so much and I've been able to access parts of myself that I didn't know were there. I've had the opportunity to heal wounds that I didn't realize were wounds. Because kids will just somehow like find a way to just find your like soft emotional center and like at it and punch you in it, and you're just like, oh my God. Yeah, so I just say like, just try. It's just try and keep trying. And if it goes off the rail, then you try again, try something different, get your kids' input. Like if you have a conversation and they're just like, oh my God, and they shut down on you, come back. Like give it some time and come back and say like, you know what, I did not love the way that conversation went. And I really seem to have upset you. What could I do differently next time? Work on it with them, build the relationship is what I will say. And then the specifics will come. They'll come.
Yeah. It's kind of like how you handle those conversations matters more than the fine details. Like
Exactly.
the fine details will come, but it's, I don't know, all that's a really beautiful way to put it, is that it is a relationship. So if you can be curious and you can just do your best to regulate, then it's more likely to go well. And then if it doesn't, you can come back.
Oh, I absolutely
Exactly.
Yeah.
that opinion. I will say it's a contrary opinion because same thing with my mother. When I think about her, most parents, in my view, see their child as a reflection of them, right? Like they're building this person, they're molding this person, they're creating this person. So I could see that being the default setting and having to do some work internally in order to turn that around to, oh no, we're in a relationship, we should be working on this together. So love it. So with that being said, I'm going to give you some pushback as far as like the age is now. That's something I do believe as well. My mother taught me at a very young age about body parts, the scientific names. That was her standing, but she was a lone wolf in our family. I come from a very Hispanic and conservative background. So most of my cousins or my peers, most of their parents believed that they shouldn't even know about sex until they're ready to pretty much get married. Like that's a conversation that you have whenever they're ready to go off with their husband. And that's something that's like deep rooted in our culture. So what would you say to a parent who is like, well, they're not adult enough to know about these facts yet? I don't feel like this is something that a kid should even have in their mind. What do they say? We shouldn't even be talking to kids about sexuality. What would be your response to someone who has that deep-rooted cultural theory?
And coming from a very similar cultural background, you know, a lot of my family is from the Caribbean and a lot of Black communities. There's a sort of similar idea that, well, we're not talking to anybody about this till like maybe at least puberty, and then it's going to be just a very clinical discussion about, well, here are a couple of things that are going to happen to your body, and then we're not even talking about like sex, the act of sex, until they're adults or close to adults. So something I would say, I guess I sometimes start with a question, and I'll say, when I say the word sexuality, what is coming into your head? What are you thinking that I mean? And understandably, sometimes I don't even use that word depending on who I'm speaking to, because understandably, a lot of folks hear sexuality and they think, well, sex, like having sex, being naked, like eroticism, adult romantic relationships, that's sexuality. And I'm like, you're not wrong. That is sexuality. But let's talk about, like, if you were in a relationship, like, you know, as an adult, here are all the things that sort of factor into how that relationship might come about. Or I might ask, like, what are all the things? How do you pick a partner? And they'll be like, oh, well, like, these are the qualities that I might look for in a partner. Like, I might want somebody who's kind. I want someone who would, like, I don't know, I want somebody who's, like, tall. I want somebody who does a good job. Like, you know, I am attracted to women. I want somebody who's a woman. And then we can break it down. And I'm like, okay, so how do you find out that somebody's kind? How do we learn kindness? Do we talk about kindness with our children?
Mm.
Yeah, we do. I say, okay, like, if you are attracted to, let's say you're attracted to women and you want to go on a date with a woman, what do you do? Like, how do you get ready? And then we'll talk about, like, oh, like, I might dress in a certain way. I might do my hair in a certain way, etc. I'm like, okay, do we talk to kids and teach them how to dress and how to present themselves? And I'm like, and does our perception and society's perception of their gender influence the clothes that we buy for them or the clothes that they themselves want to wear? Yeah. So I'm like, you're already doing it. Whether you name it as sexuality or not is, like, it's irrelevant. It's fine. You don't have to call it that. But I'm like, you're already doing it. And then the other thing that I will point out, because where I get a lot of pushback is, like, the naming of the genitals. And I'll be like, does your child ever have a bath? Are they ever undressed? Because I'm like, if they are, they know those parts are there. They're on their bodies. So
Yeah.
I'm like, and I'm like, do you name their other body parts? Like, I'm like, do they know eyes? Do they know nose? Do they know hands? Do they know feet? I'm like, you not naming that specific part of their body that they have, that they know, like, they can feel it, they can see it, they can touch it, and it doesn't have a name. I'm like, you're not teaching them something. You are. If everything else has a name and that external part of their body does not, you have taught them something.
I always say the silence is loud.
Yeah. I'm like, the things that you don't say, teach them something. I'm like, the world that you live in, all the things that you can see that are just kind of around, like the TV shows, the ads on, like, buses and billboards, the way that, you know, adults interact with each other when they're, like, hot for each other, or the way they interact when, like, one person is approaching them and the other person is like, meh. Like, the body language, all of it. I'm like, they live in the world. They see all of it. And they're taking it in. And if you don't teach them what this means, they're just going to try and figure it out some other way. So I'm like, no, you don't have to tell them, you know, when your parent or step parent or, like, my date and I go upstairs and close the door, we're fucking. Like, don't say that. Like, don't say that. Nobody, like, I'm like, yeah, nobody's telling you to say that. You don't have to tell a 3-year-old, like, about eroticism. But I'm like, a lot of 3-year-olds have a parent who's pregnant. You can explain to them, again, in, like, a fairly basic but straightforward way, this is how a pregnancy happens. This is what a pregnancy is. This is what a birth is. They will not eroticize that because they don't have the capacity for erotic feeling at that age. To feel like just enjoyable sensations in their body, but they're not connecting it to, like, an erotic desire to, like, have person in the way that an adult would or a teenager would. But I'm like, you can explain that, and then later, when they're older and the feelings start to click in, they have a connection. And then when they're older and the feelings click in, you can talk to them about the feelings. And I'm like, if you have a more sort of, what for me would be a more conservative set of values, where you're like, I believe that, you know, sex with another person, for example, should be something that you only do within the context of marriage. I'm like, say that. You can say that. Say, this is a belief that I have. This is a value I hold. This is something I think is important. And if they also think it's important, then you have the context to talk about, like, yeah, you may have something as an intellectual or emotional value, and your body may be doing something else that makes it hard. So let's talk about how
Mm.
to deal with that instead of being like, let's just pretend this doesn't exist. Because I'm like, then they don't know what to do. Like, everybody has values around when to have sex, who to have sex with. Like, I had, I am someone who I very recently realized, I'm like, oh, I'm demisexual. And I didn't know what that was for a really long time. So I went through my entire adolescence being like, I don't understand what's wrong with me, because I was like, it's not that I don't have sexual desire, but I would have sex, like, it just felt like random.
Mm.
And I was like, I'm not gay, because I'm not like not into guys, but I'm like, I'm not only into guys. So it's like, I guess I'm bisexual, but I was like, I don't understand what people are talking about when they say that they find like just people they don't know sexy. I was like, what is that? Like, that's not like, and the thing is, I'm like, yeah, if I had people in my life who were like, it is okay for us to talk about feelings that you're having in your body, I might have figured it out way, way sooner and been like, oh, okay, so I'm just not attracted to bodies in that way. I'm
Yeah.
attracted to very specific people, and what turns me on is their personalities. And so I have to wait to like suss out their personality. And then I have the feels. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, why can I like sort of objectively be like, this person is aesthetically pleasing to me and I have no desire to sleep with them whatsoever. Like,
Yeah, not having the language is so hard. A lot of kids don't have the language,
very
right?
much the language.
They know something is going on, but it's like, how do I even express that? What even is that? Right? That's tough.
What is that? And so I think, yeah, if you don't talk to your kids about any of this, and like, it doesn't mean they're not having the experiences internally. They just don't know how to talk about it. And I think, like, wouldn't you rather they talk to you than,
Mhm.
especially nowadays, like, and I'm not saying like, oh, Googling shit is terrible. I don't think it actually is. I think like the internet potentially can be a great source of information for youth, but I'm like, as particularly as their parents, like, if they trust you, you have a tremendous opportunity to help them learn how to navigate, for example, and vet information on the internet, and to help them learn how to look at something and like have a little bit of skepticism and be like, does this seem true, or does this not seem like the best thing? You have an opportunity, like, so I'm like, the thing, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm like, I don't love that for a lot of youth, their primary and only source of information about sexuality or sex is pornography. Like, pornography for some people has its place as a form of entertainment and like arousal, but I'm like, that is not the place to learn
No.
fundamentally what sex or sexual relationships or bodies or any, like, no, that's not a great primer. My analogy is like, I'm like, if your kid was approaching 16 and was about to drive, and their only exposure to cars, to driving, to whatever, had been car chase movies, you would be losing your mind. And
Yeah.
like, that's kind of what we do when we're like, no, nobody talk to them about anything. Like, don't tell them. And then they just won't care. I'm like, yeah, then all they have is like internet porn. And that's not it. It's not it.
You go. I have a question. Now that we're going into that subject, I have a question. But what were you gonna say?
I'm really glad you brought it up, because it's literally one of my biggest questions is which resources would you suggest for parents to offer their children, helping them understand how to navigate the beginning stages of sexual engagement. And when I'm saying that, I'm thinking teenagers who are actually thinking about sex. My first thing was porn, girl. I was there looking up porn to try to figure out how the mechanics work. So what would be other resources?
Okay, so for parents, okay, so I'm gonna hype one of my own resources first, because it's actually one of my favorite things that I've ever made. So on my YouTube channel, I have a video about how to talk to your kids about first-time sex. There's also the same section in my book. And in that, I have a list of questions that parents or caring adults can offer to kids to ask themselves.
Mm.
One of my biggest theories as both an educator and as a parent, and I'm like, ooh, this is a hard one as a parent. I'm like, I don't think that we actually can or should tell our own kids when they are ready to have sex. I just don't.
Yeah.
I'm like, again, I think you can talk about your own values. Like I said, I'm like, if your value is like, I think waiting to have sex until whenever, marriage, you're in college, you're 25, whatever. Like, you can have that value and you can state it as your own value, but that doesn't mean your kid has the same value. They may not. That's it. They're going to decide when they want to have sex. So that video is, here are questions for you to consider, to ask yourself. And it's things like, some of them are really basic, like, do I actually want to have sex? Why do I want to have sex? Who do I want to have sex with? Some of them dig a little deeper, like, what do I mean when I say I want to have sex? What do I want? How do I feel about communicating that specifically to my partner? If my partner wants something different, how do I feel about having a conversation about that?
Mm.
If we start to have sex and something doesn't feel okay, how do I think I might respond to that? If my partner doesn't seem like they are okay or having a good time, what will I do? If I have sex and I find that I didn't love it, what can I do? Like, it's like a whole list of things. Those are the questions. And I'm like, give them those questions.
There are so many adults who do not ask themselves those questions. So many. I can tell you from my experience as a sex therapist, plenty of adults, no matter the age, that have never really considered how they feel in various sexual situations. So that's incredible to have like a teen do those like if they're thinking about having sex, like to start that kind of like you were even saying earlier, like when to talk to kids about sex, like when to ask yourselves those questions right now would be the right time.
Yeah. So that's my resource. And then just for youth who are just curious and they're like, I just want to know because we're curious. One of my favorite resources is a website called scarletteen.com. And it is run by a colleague of mine, Heather Corinna. They have been running that website for, I want to say, 20 years.
Wow.
They have an entire team, staff of young sexuality educators, really knowledgeable, really well-trained sexuality educators. So on the website, there are articles, there is a ton of information about all aspects of sexuality. There is a team of folks who just answer questions, and there's a massive archive of questions that other teens have asked. I cannot think of a single question about sexuality that has not been asked and is not archived on that website. And again, because these are questions that are being asked by folks who are very close in age, if not the same age as the people who are asking. It's all like incredibly accessible language. It's very frank, it's very straightforward, but they're also incredibly knowledgeable. So it's really, really sound information. So that's something that I even tell like adults, I'm like, go read Scarletteen. It's so good. A book is by another colleague, Corey Silverberg, and he wrote a fairly well-known book for little kids called What Makes a Baby. And he has written a book for teens that is called Yes, Sex. It's great. He's one of the best people working and writing about sexuality, and particularly sexuality for young people in the game. Like, I cannot think of better books for young people. So he has 3. There's What Makes a Baby, which is for littles. And then there's Sex is a Funny Word, which I say is for middles. So sort of like 8 to 12. And then Yes, Sex is sort of like 12 to like 16, 17. And again, they're really accessible. They're very like their whole tone is just, questions, feelings, thoughts, curiosity, all of it is fine. All of it is okay. You are all okay. no matter what your body is, no matter what your personal feelings are around these things, like, it's all good, it's all okay, it's just warm and welcoming and wonderful. A resource for specifically parents of queer youth, or just like my dope queer youth out there. Another colleague of mine, Eva Bloom, also has a YouTube channel called What's My Body Doing? And there's it's not just queer inclusive, it's queer centric sex ed. Eva has a master's in sexuality studies. They are incredible. Also, their Instagram is just like a wealth of information, of knowledge. And I believe Eva's also on TikTok, and is What's My Body Doing on both those platforms. So those would be recommendations I would have. And yeah, for parents specifically, I'm like, you can go to my YouTube channel. I made a lot of videos. I was doing YouTube for a hot second. So I have and a lot of my videos are geared specifically towards adults who are working with, so yeah, go there. And I haven't been active on my YouTube channel since pre-pandemic, but I am considering starting it up again because I miss it. I miss making videos.
Oh, and I feel like I've learned so much from you just in this time we've had so far. I feel like we've been to your YouTube channel, and I feel like if you picked it back up, you would just have so much to share. There's probably a ton of videos you could make that are extremely helpful. And for anyone listening, all of the resources that you're sharing, and even like your ebook and anything that's been mentioned here, as well as your YouTube channel and like where to find you on social media, we'll post all of those links in the episode description. So anyone who's listening, we'll make sure that you can find the things that are being mentioned here.
Yeah, for sure. What was your question? Because I'm definitely going to go into the queer topics if you.
Oh yeah, my question was like advice on talking to teens, or maybe not even just teens, but like kids, about porn, because it's so easy for them to find. And I think it's like, if that's the only education, I'm saying education in air quotes, but that's all they're getting. I know that's not great, but just even how to have that conversation is something I've had people ask me that, and I don't even know where I would begin.
Yeah, and that's a big topic.
Yeah.
And what I have found both in my professional life and my personal life is that the conversations with teens are very different, because I find that our kids are younger. It can be a little bit more of just like, oh, let's have a conversation. Like, I will ask you questions and you can tell me things, but then I will tell you things. But particularly if you're raising them, like, they like you and they want to be around you all the time. And then, puberty or whatever hits, and it doesn't happen with every single teenager, but it is not uncommon for teenagers to then start to pull away, because they're trying to assert their independence. They're trying to become their own people. Peers become much more influential. Like, it's a thing that a lot of parents and caring adults will experience. They're like, but my teenager doesn't talk to me. And when I try to talk to them in this way, they're just like, no, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to sort of give advice, sort of assuming that that's kind of the dynamic that's happening there. So what I would say is, the first thing is that if you, for some reason, discover that your teen has been looking at porn, what I would definitely not advise doing is going to them and being like, what are you looking at? Stop it. Again, I would say, if you have strong feelings about pornography and you have values around it, don't start with that. But when you get around to that, and I will give advice about when you might get around to that part of it, you can say, again, something like, pornography is not something that I personally feel good about. And then you could give them like one quick sentence about why. You don't have to go into a whole treatise about all the bad things about porn. But you could say something like, porn is not something I feel good about. I really believe that sex is something that should be private and not broadcast. Like, whatever it is, pick one thing. Your like main point, if that's how you feel about it. Or you might say, like, I am having a hard time with the fact that you were looking at pornography. I really think that at your age, with your lack of world experience, it could influence you in ways that I'm worried about. And then that's it. That's all you say about your feelings. I'm worried. I'm concerned. I'm whatever. But where I would start is if you discovered it, or maybe if you're like, hey, I'm just, maybe you read a thing, you can just come in like that. So it's like, oh, hey, like I saw your phone and I saw you were looking at some porn, or like, yeah, I was, reading an article online about teens and porn and it's got me thinking. So I was just wondering, like, are you open to talking about this for a little bit? Ask first, because if they're not, then nothing's going to happen. So ask them if they're open to it. If they say yes, great. If they say no, then ask them, like, is there a time that we can talk about this? It's really quick. I just want to get some of your thoughts. And do it that way. You may have to ask a few times, because sometimes your kid might just be like, absolutely not. And usually the advice is then let it go.
Yeah.
It's hard, but let it go. You can maybe just let it go with okay, you know what though? If you ever want to talk about this, I would love to have a conversation about it. No judgment. I would just love to have a conversation about it. You never know. Even if it's 3 years later, they may come back to you and be like, so porn, wow. Yeah, if you get a little bit of an entry there, I think you can say something like, I understand why people your age would be interested in porn. It's really normal and really common to be curious about bodies. It's really understandable, I think, for people your age to, want to know what sex looks like, how it works. And you could even say, I think it's normal, if for your age, enjoy it. That's kind of what it's made for. And then just be like, I'm just wondering, what you think about this. Do you think it's, do you think that that's what it's like in real life? You can be like, say you did read an article and you're like, oh, I'm just worried. You can be like, yeah, I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts about why some people your age look at porn? And let them tell you, and take it from there. And then, yeah, if you want to kind of button it up with I'm in my feels about it. These are my feels. Say the thing that I said earlier, and then move on.
Yeah. So it really goes back to being curious, honestly, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that might be a place where if you are concerned about that being their only source, you could either drop some of the resources you have, maybe one, be like, oh, I found this great website, or I read this great book. If you're ever interested, here it is. Or to just say, if you ever have any questions, or you want to chat with me, or you want me to find a book or something for you, I can. Because yeah, it's tough to engage teens. And I find what is most valuable, and this is what I've gotten from teens themselves, is that what they usually seem to want from their adults is they want less, you are coming to me and telling me what I should know. They're more I just want you to be there.
Yeah.
So that when I need you, I can come to you, and I want you to just chill out so that I don't have to feel weird.
Yeah.
When I come to you. And then it's very much don't call me, I'll call you.
Yeah.
And that's what I've heard from teens that I work with, but that's also, I found that has worked fairly well for my kid and me in his teen years, is I will wait. And when he does come to me, the more I can try to just be okay. I hear what you're saying. Okay. Here's my one thing that I have to say. Okay. I love you. You're great. I'm your biggest fan. Keep living your life. I'll be here when you need me.
Oh, I love it.
Tears.
And just to be clear with the parents out there, I'm not always like that. I'm not always that chill. And sometimes I do the opposite, where I'm just really come at him intensely, and that doesn't go great most of the time. So yeah, I definitely do not do this perfectly, and sometimes really a hot mess express as a parent. But yeah, when I can just be like, yeah, I've got your back. I love you. Live your life. I'm here. I will always be here. You can't really do anything that will change that. Then occasionally he'll come to me, and sometimes every once in a while, like once every 6 months, we'll have this like really deep, intense talk. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so exciting. And I get to like say the things. And then there are like whole days where I'm like, I literally saw you once when you came out of your room to get food.
Yeah.
Accurate. Okay, and I'll try to make this quick because we're kind of pressed on time. But girl, I clocked you immediately at the beginning of this podcast. You're very gender inclusive as far as your speech, and I've seen you use like person with vagina or a person with, and I, as a queer woman, I very much appreciate that. So thank you. Speaking on the parents discovering that their kids are watching porn, that's actually a perfect segue, because a lot of my friends, like my actual peers, they were outed because we were in the time of new internet, and browser history wasn't a thing that we knew that we had to be careful about. So a lot of my friends were outed because of their porn site uses that they would look up, right?
Oh, that's terrible.
So my question to you is, how do you recommend like a parent navigating that they think that their child is on the queer spectrum? How would you have them approach it? Because just for context, my mother, she interfered a couple of notes that I had to my girlfriend at the time. And so she asked me before I came out if I was gay. We actually had that conversation probably twice. And my wife had a similar experience with her mother, where there was something that happened that, she interfered with, that she found out and she asked. But both of us at the time when we were younger, we weren't ready to talk to our parents about that, especially knowing my mother's views on the queer community. So I wasn't ready. So I didn't come out to her till many years later, because I didn't feel comfortable having that conversation.
Yeah.
So what would be your advice to a parent who discovers these, I guess, these signs that their kid might be on the queer spectrum? Like how should they approach?
Okay. So first I'll start with my advice to all parents, all of us, which is maybe kind of move through the world assuming that your kid or some kid in your life is or could be queer. Just assume that.
That's so smart. That's so smart.
It's so hard for parents to do that.
Yeah.
Because they don't want their kid to be queer.
And I know, like, oftentimes people are like, well, like, they're kids, like, they don't even know. And I'm like, okay, but if we're being real though, at least in Western society, we generally move through the world assuming our kids are straight. We do.
Yeah.
Like, and it's so innocuous that oftentimes we don't even clock that that's what we're doing. But I remember when my son was like little, like literally a baby that I was still carrying around, people would say like, oh, he's so handsome, he's gonna break some girl's heart someday. Nobody batted an eyelash. Nobody. And like I would like people say things like that to babies or about babies all the time.
Yeah.
So just assume that, oh, be like, yeah, you could be straight, you could be gay, you could be cis, you could be trans, you could like whatever. Just kind of assume that that's a possibility. I'm like, assume that there's a queer person in the room. Assume that there is like, even if the child doesn't like internally identify as queer, if it like, because I'm like, maybe it has or hasn't developed yet, whatever. But just assume that that could be a part of their future. That's my advice to everybody. But specifically for parents who are like, I am getting queer vibes from my kid, and I really think this is a thing that's happening, or they're seeing, like, they're like, ooh, yeah, like I saw browser history, or I like happened upon like text that seemed like flirty, and that's like their best friend of the same gender, or like, yeah, my child who was assigned male at birth is just really into makeup tutorials, and I think they've been sneaking my lipstick. My advice would be just love them, support them, and let them tell you when they're ready. Let them tell you when they are ready. Don't probe them, don't ask them, just treat them with love, with respect, give them time, because I'm like, they may not know yet, they may be exploring, they may not have the language. I will also say, if you're like, ooh, I am like 99% sure of this. It is understandable. And I've talked to parents like this where they're like, I know my kid is queer. Why won't they tell me? I have let them know. We are like an accepting family. Like, why won't they tell me? What I will say is, it's not about you. It's not, it like their choice to not tell you may have nothing to do with, again, anything that you did wrong. It may have, like, I'm like, yeah, you may have been like the most supportive, open, like queer friendly household on earth, but you're still their parents. And even if you're not like this, your kids still live in a world where we hear stories daily of queer kids who get kicked out of their homes, whose parents disown them, whose parents freak out. We are living in a world, like, I know this is happening in Canada, and I know it's even more intense in the States, where like their representatives, there are like people who represent the government who are actively putting legislation in place to harm queer kids.
Yeah.
So when they come out to you, most likely, like, that is going to be a moment of like, it's kind of like a point of no return. And this is who I am. And now you know. And in the same way that you are 99% sure they're queer, they're probably 99% sure that you will be okay. But they don't know for sure. And you don't, like, in the same way that you don't know for sure. And even that 1% chance that in their head, they're like, maybe they won't accept me. Maybe they'll kick me out into this like big, dangerous world that's actively trying to harm me. That's scary. So they need time, like they just may need time. And if you keep being loving and accepting and in their corner and their biggest fan, they will. But it has to be their choice. Like, I think one of the biggest gifts we can give our kid is agency. Give them that agency. Give them that gift of agency to let them decide when and how they want to tell you. And what you can be doing in the meantime is just preparing for that day and for that conversation, and think of all the loving, kind, affirming things that you will say to them. And think about how you're just going to say to them, thank you for telling me. I love you so much. I'm so happy to know this about you. That's it. Just wait.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna make me cry now. That's great.
Oh, it's got you emotional. Yeah, because that would have been, I mean, imagine how nice it would have been if that was like, that was the experience you had.
Yeah.
I know it's not the experience you had, but if it was,
Jesus.
how big of a difference that would have made.
Oh yeah, big difference. All right, Nadine. So part of this podcast that we aim is to, this is a sex positive podcast. So the things that I've learned about the sex positive movement as starting this podcast is we preach consent. That's the big one. We also are very inclusive and, as far as all types of sexualities and lifestyles, totally, inclusive. And the most important one in my eyes, as far as like the sex positive movement, is the fact that we preach inclusive, comprehensive sex education, which is something you very much do. So I am curious, and I ask all my guests this, what was your sex education? And I want to know both at home, like when you were growing up with your parents, and I want to know what sex education you actually experienced at school, especially in Canada. So
yeah. So my sex education at home was, all things considered, not terrible. So both my parents were in the health field. My mother was a psychiatric nurse, and my father was a researcher who worked in addiction. So they were probably a little more comfortable than maybe some of my peers' families around talking about bodies. My mom much more so than my dad, I would say. So at home, like, I don't remember this, but I know that I don't remember a time when I didn't understand that babies came from sex. And my mom said, apparently I asked when I was like 3, and she just kind of straight up told me. I also specifically remember her giving me a copy of the first edition of Our Bodies Ourselves when I was like 10, I think.
Oh.
And I remember there's one page, I still remember it was page 151, and there were illustrations of clitoral stimulation, and I was like, well. things like that. So like, we didn't have like a ton of conversations, but when we did, my mom was like pretty straightforward with me. Like, she gave me the book. I remember being like pretty well prepared for having my period when it came. Always used like I gotta give my parents props for this. They did like teach me all the names for my body parts. Like when we were bathing, it was just part of conversation. I grew up saying the word vulva. Like that was the word I knew. I did not hear the word vagina until I like had my first sex, like in school sex ed class, because it was a vulva. And so I was like, oh, okay. Like, and now like thinking back, I'm like, okay, that was actually pretty radical for the times, because I still meet most people now who like refer to the vulva as a vagina, which I'm like, it's not the end of the world. I'm like, but it's not, they're related, but they're not the same. So yeah, it was like pretty okay. I don't remember ever feeling like it was like super taboo. I was a big masturbator from childhood. Again, it was like a comfort thing to put me to bed. And I remember like sometimes if I happened to be like sharing a room with my mom, like I would do it. She was there. Like she never made a big deal about it or anything. So, she may have once said like, okay, that's like a bedroom thing, or I don't even remember. So I never felt like weird about stuff like that. So I'm like, not bad. Like, not bad, Mom. My dad wasn't as involved, but like he knew when I got my period and stuff. I didn't want him to, but he did, and he didn't know about it. So I'm like, pretty good, like pretty decent.
Yeah.
School. So at the time that I was in public school, so I live in a province called Ontario, and in Canada, our public school sex education it falls under the health and physical education curriculum. And each province has its own provincial curriculums for each subject, including health and physical education. So at least as far as the curriculum goes, it's a standard curriculum across my entire province. So I believe when I was in school, I believe sex education started in grade 6. I think that was when we first had it. And of course, I remember like it was about puberty. So I remember learning what puberty was. And I was like, hi, already happening, thanks. So we learned about like, yeah, our sex. So here, sex ed is not gender segregated. You're all in the same class. It's health class. So we learned about periods. I remember we learned about, oh my gosh, why can't I think of like the actual word? Boners, erections. Erections. We learned about ejaculation. We learned about secondary sex characteristics. I remember that because I remember us all giggling about that. I also remember that's when I learned the word masturbation.
Oh.
I did it for years, and I was like, oh, that's a thing? That has a name? Like, I didn't even think of it as a sexual thing. I was like, that's just like a bedtime thing that I do. I'm like, yeah, like.
That's incredible, because us growing up in Texas, you would never get a teacher to say the word masturbation. Like we maybe like figured it out with our friends, but it was never like
no way
discussed.
Grade 6, I don't know why I was like, oh, that kind of bums me out. I'm like, you've ruined it. You put a label on it. For me, I was just like, nighttime routine's the same. Bath, brush my teeth, put on my nightgown, touch myself, go to sleep. Like that was it. Oh, and read a book. And I was like, oh, that's like a cumbersome, weird word. So I remember learning that. And then from then on, there were always 2 weeks of gym where it was health, and that was all the sex stuff. But what I also remember is that, so I was in grade 6. I started grade 6 in 1986. So I was like 86 to 87. I was in grade 6. So we were at like the height of the AIDS pandemic. And so what I very much remember, my key takeaway from sex ed was abstinence. Like, don't have sex. However, if you're going to have sex, only have sex with one person. Monogamy, monogamy, monogamy.
Mm.
Also, if you are going to have that monogamous sex, which you should not be having, but if you are, you need to wear a condom. Condoms were freaking everywhere, all over the place. They were like, these are condoms. Like, I saw so many condoms go on so many bananas growing up in school, like all the time. And then all this talk about like, there's no excuse to not wear a condom. Like, always wear one, always have one. Like, we were obsessed with condoms. I learned also like contraception and whatnot, but like it was very, very condom focused, but also don't have sex, also only have like one partner ever. So, and it was very heteronormative, like nobody was talking about queer stuff except to be like, you know who has AIDS? Gay. Okay, that's like a bunch of bullshit. I didn't think that at the time, but I think it now. There was never like a trans or non-binary person ever to be seen. My first exposure to a trans person was in the movie The Crying Game. So that was it. It was like very heteronormative. It was very like white. Like all the diagrams we had were either just like black on white, but if they were color, they were always like pink genitals and very pale, unmelanated people. No discussion of like intersections of sexuality and like race or disability or like sexuality when you're in a fat body or like sexuality if you like are dealing with an illness. Like nothing about consent, none of that. So it wasn't the worst, but I'm like, it was less than basic. Like there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know. And it was very much rooted in this idea of like, there is a right way to be a sexual human being. And that is to be like very chaste and only have one partner and be committed and just like constantly be using condoms. And if you are not doing that, then you are doing it wrong.
And in school, you had it at grade 6, and then did you also have it in high school too?
We did. So again, because and this is actually one of my peeves about sex education, because it's folded into health and phys ed, at least in Ontario and in most provinces in Ontario, in Canada, and then we have 3 territories as well. Because it's folded into phys ed is only a required course until grade 9. So I had it until grade 9, and then I happened to take a phys ed in grade 10, but it was a specialized phys ed. I took grade 10 dance. And I don't think, I'm trying to remember if we had a health component in that, probably not. So I'm like, okay, that seems dumb that at a time in youth lives where like suddenly the rate of youth actually having sexual relationships starts to go up really significantly, which here, grade 10, for most people, that's when you're like 15, maybe lapsing into 16. I'm like, okay, that's when like the province is like, nah, if you feel like it. And if you want to take gym. So I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm not a sporty person. And especially back then, I'm like, I was a book nerd. Like I was not going to take gym. I'm like, yeah, so they just like cut me off. And then I did that project in grade 12. So maybe that's why. Maybe I was like, oh, I really miss health class. So I will just make my own health class. That is focused a lot on condoms, because like that's all I was ever taught was condoms.
Okay. Actually, it was your education though is much more thorough than I've seen as far as like the people we've talked to in the States. So I mean, I'll give it up to Canada for that at least.
It's more comprehensive now. We still have a long way to go. But I look at like what's happening in sex education in Sweden, and then I'll talk to some of my colleagues and they're just like, yeah, it's fine, but like we could be doing so much more. So I just think sex education for youth, like there's so much more we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And girl, you're doing it. So thank you.
Yes, you're doing the good work that we need. Well, I think that was our last question, right? Okay.
Oh my God.
Awesome. Well, hey, to anyone listening, just as kind of a wrap up, we've had a chance to talk for, gosh, what, like an hour and a half now. Again, with Dr. Nadine Thornhill, EDD, an award-winning sexuality educator, and you have just been a wealth of knowledge. I really cannot describe like how much I've learned just doing this interview with you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we just have loved having you on. And again, like I said earlier, um, all the work you're doing, how to find you, and the resources you shared, we will share those in the episode description. It'll be on our social media. Anyone can find those resources once this episode drops.
Yeah. And one last question, actually, I want to give this like these next couple seconds time for you. Is there anything that
Yeah.
the audience would like? Is there anything you want to plug as far as what you're working on, what you're passionate about at the time that you want to promote? So please take it away.
So I've got some things, I've got some new stuff percolating. Not quite ready to announce it yet, but if people want to keep up with me, I have a newsletter. So if you just go to NadineThornhill.com/newsletter, you can sign up. And you won't get like super spammed. I send out 2 newsletters a month. And they've got like tips for navigating conversations around different aspects of sexuality. And then sometimes I throw in just because random stuff. Like I'm a movie fan. So like the last newsletter, we had a poll about like, if you're a movie fan, who do you think is going to win Best Picture? Who do you want to win Best Picture at the Oscars? So sometimes it's like sex ed, insights, tips, and then occasionally just like random stuff that I'm thinking about, because again, like I said, I have ADHD. And so sometimes you got to go on a non-related tangent. You just have to.
Yeah, it makes it fun. Yeah, that's great. Okay.
All right, great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, for anyone listening, please like, subscribe, and follow our page, whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Apple or Spotify, and leave us a comment. What did you think of this episode? What did you take away from it? And what would you like us to continue expanding upon for future episodes? Thanks for tuning in. And again, we are Sex Positivity Unfiltered. And remember to stay curious and fuck politeness.
Yeah.